David, thank you so much for being with us here today to have this conversation. Tell us a little bit about your background in the creative fields.
Sure thing. Thanks for having me, Brennan. My background, I've been I counted it the other day, 32 years a graphic artist. It's been my sole profession all this time. It's my sort of love. And I've worked in the graphic design fields, the fields of film and broadcast. You can even find my name on imdb.com if you look really hard. And alongside all of that, the last sort of 15 years or so, I've been pursuing this love for Catholic sacred art, particularly in the form of the icon, but also extending, hopefully, into areas such as sculpture, all the areas that the Catholic sacred art functions and moves within. And I'm really propelled by this concept of beauty more than anything else. Everything that I put my hand to, I have to ensure that it is beautiful. And that's always been the case. Whether it's secular work, sacred art, it's always focused on beauty.
We'll come back to that point because I think that's really important today. That's often lost in these sorts of discussions about art and the sort of highly subjective nature of all of that now. But tell me, we're going to talk about you've been involved recently in some new pieces that have been commissioned and have gone into a new church. But how did you get into sacred art? What was it that, because it's a big shift to go from, I guess, regular graphic design work and on those other spaces, broadcast, into the world of sacred art. What brought you in there?
Well, it's an interesting story. I have to first and foremost thank my wife for a very simple act. And, small things bring great graces. My wife, Alison, years ago gave me a little card, I think it was for my birthday, and on the front of it was an icon of the Holy Trinity. And I hadn't been too caught up in old medieval art and that kind of thing so much. But on the back of the card was a explanation of the icon. And that was the classic mind-blown moment. and it described what was in the icon and the meaning. And meaning is very important to me. So that was the first thing. So that switched me on to icons particularly. But second to that, as a graphic artist, I was exploring new technologies. I was really interested in CGI imaging. In fact, I always was interested in this area right back to when I was 16 years old with my first home computer. Trying to generate things in 3 dimensions inside a computer was this fascinating pursuit. And as I was developing it, and I realized there was this common aspect of it that could be found in other areas of art. And I asked myself, well, what areas of art were particularly focused on technologies and the technical aspect of performing the art, performing the visual art in this case. And I look back and it was really obvious. It was the Renaissance. And that was when there was a boom in technology. It's before the Industrial Revolution, but nevertheless, artists started working smarter, not harder. And they were using lenses and prisms and what you call camera obscuras, which is a box that works like a camera, like a massive camera, and the image gets projected on the back wall and they can trace that image. So the Renaissance was a particularly enthralling thing to discover and to dive into. And in doing so, it led eventually back to the year 2000, a trip to Italy to travel from Milan down to Rome for the World Youth Day. And where I got to see a lot of these famous Renaissance pieces and get further inspired. So I was suddenly in this realm of fine art in a particular period of history. And then I took one step back in history to the medieval period and to Giotto particularly. And Giotto is the man who straddles the medieval with Renaissance. And taking on and absorbing Giotto's work and actually seeing it through Italy, then I started examining what is this thing, medieval art, iconography. And the two things came together sort of around the same time, the card from Alison, the interest in antiquity and older artwork. And then I just had this passion for iconography from then on. It fitted well with my faith as a Catholic. And so, in summing that all up, eventually it dawned on me. I said to myself, why aren't I actually painting icons? I can do this. And then that sort of really brings us to today, a journey that's been the last 15 years.
Iconography is quite interesting to me in the sense that it's a little bit different, isn't it, really, than other types of painting where it's not even so much painting, right? As if I understand it correctly, you would talk about writing and praying the work that you do, and there's sort of it's not simply your idea, it's a sort of a really very clear God-centric, God-focused way of unfolding and revealing something to the world. It's quite beautiful, isn't it? That is very different to other types of artwork.
It certainly is. The term icon writing is very popular, particularly in the West. And I'm not going to bash it, but I've been corrected by orthodox iconographers online who I'm in contact with. Not particularly corrected directly, but they are at pains to point out that the Russian word to write something and to paint something is the same Russian word. So if I'm using a stylus to paint a painting or a stylus to write a letter, the Russian word to write is the same word for both activities. And so it's sort of overflown into the realm of painting. Painting an icon is that you're writing it. And that's okay. It's good we have good respect for the Orthodox tradition, and that they have maintained the tradition all these years since the schism. And we can go in later about how things diverged for Catholicism. But yes, in a nice way, in a poetic way, we can say that we are painting the gospel in line and colour, and that they are sermons in colour and light, things like that. Those are nice ways to describe iconography, and it's useful with the West because people don't understand icons in the West. It's a foreign thing. We're in a soup of postmodernism, a porridge that we're wading through, and so the icon sort of beams a light through that and challenges us. Hey, I am something different. Here I am. Perhaps consider me.
Let's come back and talk about some of those differences. I want to talk a little bit about perhaps symbolism and sacred art that people might often miss without even realising, what they're actually looking at. But you've mentioned here that the soup, the porridge of postmodernism, as you call it. That's a great term. And that brings me to something I really wanted to discuss with you. And it seems to me that now a lot of, I guess even the term modern art really is, it feels to me to be an absurdity. I think of stories like, there's been more than one of these, the ordinary everyday cleaner at the art gallery who comes in after an installation showing and who's just an ordinary everyday working class person who's living their lives and probably in the realm of common sense, working hard to feed their family, and they see a bag of rubbish in the corner and they think, oh, that's rubbish because that's what common sense tells me, I better throw it out. And they discover the next day, and to the horror of everyone, that in actual fact they've destroyed an art installation. It seems to me that there is just some aspects of modern art, not all, but what's being done in art now, it's got into the absurd, hasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It has absolutely gone to the absurd. And the perfect example, that's a great example of the cleaner tidying up an actual exhibition piece. But the recent example of the invisible sculpture that sold for $20,000, I thought that was cheap, as modern art prices go. But it's really it's an interesting, fascinating topic. If we look at the art of cultures throughout time, we see there's a recurring theme, and that is they saw their art as a mediator between a higher realm and this ephemeral realm that we live in. And their art was based on three premises: that there is this higher realm, that this world is an image or an echo or even an incarnation of that higher realm, and that art was the means to mediate between those two realms. And you can look at any indigenous peoples like the Maori and their myths and legends, and you can find this mediation attempting to be taken to humanity attempting to take place and try and perform this mediation. We get to modern art, and we arrive at this place where it struggles with that concept because it simply does not believe that there is this other realm. So that the modern art is always downward looking in a sense, and sometimes downward looking to the gutter, whereas traditionally art has been a means to, I like to use two concepts, that good art, whether it's visual, a written story, a movie, does two things. It illuminates the intellect and purges the soul. And modern art just cannot achieve either of those things. I think we need to be a bit quite specific with this concept of modern art, because there's artists like Ron Muick who sculpt those incredibly realistic, oversized human sculptures, and you look at those and you think, well, that's a giant lying there asleep. I can see the translucency of the flesh. Now, Ron Muick is actually shunned by the modern art world because he's a craftsman, and modern art often lacks a virtue of craft. It's the new, the different, and the ugly. Versus before that, it would have been the profound, the inspiring, and the beautiful.
Let's talk about that point of beauty for a second, because this is something that I was thinking about in preparing for today's conversation. In fact, you mentioned it in your bio, this, and I think you're quoting Pope John Paul II there, epiphanies of beauty, as a description of what art should be. So it seems to me that really, if we want to be authentic in art, then beauty is not simply a byproduct or something that happens every now and then. It's essential, surely, if the art is to be authentic, isn't it?
Absolutely, yes. And we've got to be clear about our terms too, because there is this often quoted modern concept: art is, or beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And you can give that a proper name. It's called aesthetic relativism. And it's a recent concept. It sort of stems from the era of the Romantic period, which I would loosely say is the 18th century. And that's the moment in history where things changed aesthetically. So composers and artists, they stopped painting or composing music to please an audience. They started composing or painting to please themselves. And it was up, and at that point, it's like, well, like it or lump it, here's my artwork. I like it. I don't care about you. Take it as it is. And that's where we ended up with.
That's interesting. That actually speaks to something else I want to talk to you about in just a moment. But it seems then, this is a question I had for you actually. Do you think that perhaps then we underestimate the role of art in actually shaping culture? Now, we know art is also a reflection of a culture, like a culture in crisis is going to produce probably things that are ugly. But I think often when perhaps, let's say, more people of goodwill, when they thought about their kids going into a school and they thought where they could end up being corrupted, they thought, well, maybe it might happen with sex education, or maybe it might happen with some really militant materialist philosopher or something like that. But in actual fact, that we forgot in actual fact that literature and the English department and the art room were often where a lot of those things were actually taking place. Right? It seems to me we perhaps underestimate art as a teacher of people about what they should or shouldn't believe.
Yes, I think you're right. Very much so that art is often a mirror and reflects current attitudes, values, and so forth. Art also does have a role in shaping culture as well. And you mentioned Pope John Paul II there, where I've quoted him, Epiphanies of Beauty. And it's, as I've said in my bio, it's Pope John Paul II's letter to artists that he wrote in 1999 that has been very compelling for me. And it's an exhortation from a father to his children to produce epiphanies of beauty. And if we take, I think it's Dostoevsky's famous quote, "Beauty will save the world." I'm still plumbing the depths of that statement as to what it means and what and how it challenges me for what I need to do. So it's an ongoing process, that one for me. But I look at beauty from a classical point of view. I look to Plato and Aristotle and their concept, particularly Plato's concept of the good, the true, and the beautiful, and how the three dialogue, in a sense, or are expressions of each other in certain ways.
Yeah, the whole subjectivizing and relativizing of things, you can't even have the conversation effectively, because it becomes a get out of jail free card. Well, that's just your view. But really there is something here that matters. And I think too now, this is something I wanted to discuss with you, is that when I think of art, I think of the cinematic art as well. You've got some experience here in broadcast. I think of the way in which cinema of late, it seems, has lost that truly beautiful edge. There are these wonderful examples that appear every now and then. I think of Terrence Malick's recent film, A Hidden Life. Beautiful work of art and a beautiful and important story about a heroic Christian man who opposed and stood against and refused to live the lie of Nazism. But it seems now a lot of cinema and even television storytelling, which is part of the arts now, and even a lot of fiction that's presented to people is in book form, it's really a corruption of authentic mythology, right? It's more propaganda than it is mythology. It's not even beautiful art.
Yes, often it's driven by vulgarity. I got a subscription to Disney Plus, and that was my means of going through the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the first 3 phases, which I really enjoyed. I got absolutely no issue, but it was interesting. A Catholic friend online pointed out some philosophical aspects, and like for instance, how the Hulk David Banner and the Hulk are able to sort of reconcile themselves in the one person. And he pointed out, he says, dialectics, right there. Thesis, antithesis, now synthesis.
Yep, Hegel would be proud. The incredible Hegel.
Exactly. That's the thing. I love cinema. I love storytelling, always have. And I am very conscious. I do like to analyze movies and see what are the themes, what are the symbols, what's driving the creator, the author, to propel a certain message here. And Star Wars is a big thing with me.
I was going to ask you about that, because that's the pinnacle of like symbolism and mythology and types. Lucas modelled it, on those Jungian archetypes and Joseph Campbell's myth. and yet it seems to me that is one clear cinematic franchise now, or mythological world that has been completely corrupted now since being taken over by Disney.
Absolutely. I mean, the first movie, subtitled A New Hope, is quite important, because George Lucas is quoted as saying, when he handed over the intellectual property to Disney, I could be wrong, but anyway, he did say, make sure the stories have hope, because these kids, they need hope. I have seen... I was there back in 1978, 77 when it came out. I was a little 7-year-old myself. Yeah. And I remember sitting on the stairs of the Cinerama cinema waiting to see it with my family. The thing is that I recall at school before that, who was our heroes? When we were playing games in the playground, we were going, Daniel Boone, Davy Crockett. Who wants to play Cowboys and Indians? Star Wars came, that all disappeared. Yeah. It was Luke Skywalker, Han Solo, particularly Luke was our hero. But I do believe that, I mean, there's this whole sort of story of the infiltration of communism into the West and the demoralization of society. I actually believe that Star Wars halted that demoralization for a period where we all had our intellects illuminated and our souls purged for a period. I recall, who was it? It was Alec Guinness being interviewed, one of those 70s talk shows, Parkinson actually, and how they both quipped it that they went to the cinema, they were taken to another place, a wonderful world, and then when they left the cinema, they walked outside, and the world just, compared to the realm that they'd just been taken to, they had to realize, oh, I'm back in the world now. I'm back in this place that is an echo of that realm. And they were sort of, they were lost for words in a way, and sort of speechless coming out of the cinema, describing the experience they just had.
Well, that stark shift too you see really in the science fiction of the era, and even a lot of cinema in general was very dour, and it was very dark because it reflected a dark mood of society, and you can see the way in which that cultural Marxist revolutionary spirit is really, the artists. I think it was Marx who actually referred to artists as the soul or the conscience of a society. And so they're really sort of working in that space. And all of a sudden Star Wars, it's just so about face, right? Particularly in the world of sci-fi, where it's not these dark, nihilistic examinations of the soul and what is real anymore. It's just, well, of course certain things are real, and hope is one of the most important ones, and virtue is all of a sudden back on the table again in a really big way.
Exactly. And what has come along since that sort of equaled it? I don't recall much. I mean, The Matrix was big for a while, but that was selling a vision of Gnosticism more than anything else, and it's a lot of philosophical complexities to it that really need to be analysed quite strictly in that regard. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? You're right. Nothing really has. Probably the closest we've had is when Peter Jackson, I think, probably there's some critiques that could be made, but I think rather beautifully adapted probably one of the pinnacle moments of Western mythology, and that's really Tolkien's work, but not much else. Not much else.
Yes, particularly the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Over the Hobbit.
Oh yeah, yeah. Sorry, no, I didn't. I wasn't even talking about the Hobbit. Let's not go down that dark hole.
Yeah. There's many reasons why I went that way, and God bless them. But yeah, absolutely. In our house, we love reading, and we love Tolkien, and we love Lucas. So, not so fond of J.K. Rowling. No one here is really. They're just not even interested in it. It's as simple as that. There's no There's no embargo on her work. Just the boys aren't interested. Yeah, simple as that.
That brings up a point actually. Is I know there's a discussion right now with and I'm not sure where it's at, but this new Lord of the Rings television series, it seems like it's off again, on again, off again, on again. But they put out a casting call recently, a couple of months back, and they indicated that they were looking for actors who would be happy to do nudity. And straight away, everyone goes, uh-oh, is this turning into Game of Thrones? And this is a point I'd like to explore, is that the question around art versus pornography. Because it seems it's a conversation that needs to be had. And our culture has just eroticized the human body, and it's pulled it into the world of pornography now. But what happens is people say, well, it's not pornography, it's art. But there is quite a distinction there that's important, right? It must be made.
Yes, yeah. Again, this is the porridge of postmodernism to wade through, to get through, to get out of the garbage, to get to the gem of beauty that's illuminating, hopefully, our intellects and purging our wills. I lament a little bit my childhood, because family time back in the 70s was sitting down as a family watching the Benny Hill show. And no, it wasn't quality viewing, or the goodies for that matter. And there was always a little moment of gratuitous nudity.
Yeah.
My dad, I was over at my father's place a few weeks ago. He said to me, oh, look, I've recorded this off Sky or whatever, and it was an episode of the Goodies.
Yeah.
And he goes, you used to giggle at this like it was one of my favourite programs. But we're sitting there watching, and a woman starts disrobing on the corner of the street, and I thought, I'll just see how this goes. My two boys, 16 and 12, sitting next to me, and then all of a sudden Thomas, the old one, grabs the remote and just fast forwards it. He didn't want to go there. It's everywhere. It's something we have to negotiate in a sense, and try to eliminate in our houses. Let's go back to Lord of the Rings for a brief moment. They at the end of the battle, they come back to the Shire, and they've got this little purges that has to happen back at the Shire. And it's the same with our homes. We have to purge these things out of our homes to protect the innocence and purity, particularly of our children, but also our spouses and ourselves. So yeah, it's an ongoing thing.
Well, that purge it's interesting, because people, when they think of purge and what you just said, they think, it's just reactionary. But I think of the model of what Christ offers us when he talks about in the Gospels. If you find a demon in a house, you don't just cast the demon out and leave the house empty, because otherwise 7 more will come and take its place. So I like to think of that as we say no and we purge, because we then fill the empty space with what is good, true, and beautiful. So that there's no or a lot less room for the things that would corrupt to actually corrupt us.
Yes. So let's not look at the obscene images. Let's read the scriptures. Whenever it's Lent, and I see people on Facebook saying, "Well, I'm giving up Facebook for Lent," and I say to myself, "Oh, come on, go hard. Don't just give up Facebook. Do some spiritual reading. Do, like you say, take on something that can fill in a good and wholesome and virtuous way that which you have put aside. Empty yourself out of those things, but also fill up with the good things."
Yeah, and that's important, right? In a culture like ours, with going back to that point where art has become ideology for a lot of people, we can't understate the whole nature of the sexualized sort of revolution that's been tied to art. I think of something like surrealism and Salvador Dali, who very much takes Freud's ideas and says, well, I'm going to incorporate this into the artistic realm, and this very much this idea that the unconscious self, the unchecked self, and really orientated in sexual desire is the highest good and the most important truth teller. We see this in apparently 1945, I think it was, wasn't it, when Hitchcock made Spellbound with Gregory Peck, and the sort of the basic synopsis of the film is there's a guy who holds the key to solving a murder, but it's a dream, so it's in his unconscious. Apparently Salvador Dali designed that sequence with the sort of the surreal stuff where he's having the dream sequence, and that's very much what he was trying to do there, was to say, this is our philosophy, that the key to unlocking and understanding humanity is actually found deep in your desires, and you just unlock them and let them go. And so we don't realize it because we're like frogs in a pot, but we're swimming in that, and our art is very much, and people probably even producing the art today wouldn't even know, a lot of them, that's the ideology that shapes the way they think about themselves, their art, and what they produce.
Absolutely, yeah. Dali's an interesting character because he's both a surrealist at one stage, but also a deep Catholic artist at another stage too. So I recall a friend telling me that Dali he was commissioned to portray hell, and he, as a result of that commission, he converted back to Catholicism.
Wow.
And that's why we do have a period of Dali's work that is centered on sacred art, but it's also deep and beautiful as well. So that is important to point out that he did have a moment, but prior to that, a lot of his work was centered around, I think the title of one piece of artwork is called The Lugubrious Game, which is a euphemism for self-abuse. And so all those themes were in his work before. And it's like, Leonardo da Vinci is credited as saying, let me just quote this, this is his famous quote: "The painter was another god who held the secrets of the universe."
Yeah.
So he's one of I think he's the first guy who starts pitching this idea of the ego of the artist as a type of god who can divine and create out of nothing. They can't really, but this whole sort of agenda comes. I think it originates with him, and that's a dangerous place to be in, of course.
Well, that speaks to the fact that I was going to ask you about this next, actually. Here, what you've described with Dali is a man who has lost sight completely of the sacred order, and then he rediscovers it, and in doing that realizes his place in that, which is not as the all-powerful creator of and subjective lord of reality itself, but as subservient to it. And so his work starts to reflect that. How important then is sacred art in a culture like ours, which has really, there's no doubting the West no longer has a sacred order. It's lost. And so how important then is sacred art in helping people to recover? Dali was a very practical example where he actually did through the process of creating art, but those of us who encounter art, who are not creators of it, we might just encounter it. How important is sacred art then?
It's immensely important. As an anecdotal point of view of my own, I painted an icon for my parish, and I completed it, I think, the very moment that the Christchurch massacre was taking place. Wow. I literally put the last paint stroke down and heard about the massacre. The next day, a friend came over and saw it, and he was so moved. He goes, said, "I'm speechless after everything that's happened in this country in the last 24 hours. I get a little sense of hope, just a spark, just from seeing that." So I put it online the next day, not to show off what I've done, but I prefaced it with the statement, one of the reasons I have elected to paint sacred art is to bring truth, beauty, and goodness into a world that's wounded and in need of healing. And I just put this here for anyone to receive a moment, a spark of beauty. I love that. My favourite quote from Lord of the Rings, and look, I'll be completely honest with you, I've yet to read the whole of it at my age, but a little confession there. My favourite quote is that moment where Sam is trudging up the mountain, and he looks up and the sky parts for a moment, and he sees a white star shining through the darkness. And it says something to the effect of, the beauty of it smote his heart.
Yeah, wow.
It's the most powerful line in the Lord of the Rings that I've read so far. But that's exactly it for me. It's encapsulated in that concept that Tolkien so eloquently expressed in his work there.
Well, I contrast what you've just said there, and particularly your experience with this sacred art that actually sparks hope, to, I don't know if you saw it, but there was people gathered, I think it was around one of the North Island mosques a couple of days later, a whole lot of local Kiwi people gathered to sort of show solidarity, and then it was in the media, they then spark up and start singing a hymn, but the only song they know that they think is sacred is John Lennon's Imagine, which has the words, imagine there's no religion, like wouldn't that be a better world? And you realise at that moment, my gosh, here you have a culture with Islam that understands that even if there's error, they understand there is a sacred order, right? And then you come against this culture which used to have a sacred order, which no longer has, and it's clear because the people don't know what to do in that moment. They start singing a John Lennon song as if it's a hymn, and you realise, my gosh, you contrast that with a beautiful work of sacred art that you've created that sparks hope, and it's that they're just so diametrically opposed, right?
Yeah, it's slightly absurd, isn't it? Because it was obviously the Muslim people who were persecuted in that attack, and Islam is a religion. And here they are singing something that could really be quite insulting. Yeah. With that literal statement, imagine there's no religion, no God above, no heaven above. Yeah. It's the juxtaposition is it's absurd almost.
Well, it points to something you said before about that vision of art that is pointing us upwards. And whereas what we have today is just, it grounds it in the self, and particularly in the emotive self. And so I imagine they're probably singing that because they think, well, what's the most emotional sort of ballad that I know? And it's not, there's nothing sacred about it. There's nothing true about it. It's just emotional, right?
Yes. And let's be fair, John Lennon, he knew what he was doing and he wrote it, and he said, well, this is the Communist Manifesto in a lyrical form. He's quoted as saying that. You know that I play, guitars and various other instruments, and I was involved in a ukulele band actually, for about 4 years up until the end of last year. We'd have an open mic, and inevitably there'd be, I won't use this as a derogatory term, but someone who's a baby boomer. Yeah, they'd come up. They'd do either one of two things: a Bob Dylan song, or Imagine. You could count on it.
Blowing in the Wind or Imagine, I bet, was it?
You've got it precisely. Yeah. Protest songs.
I think even Dylan would be appalled at that. How essential then is, when we talk about sacred art, can it be truly sacred art if it lacks beauty? Because I know that there is. I've seen, I don't know how you feel about this, but do you find yourself perhaps some recent, and I use the term recent liberally, recent church building work even, and church art that you look at and you go, my gosh, this is sort of an imposition of a completely different ideology under the guise of art within a church because the beauty's missing there. So
yes,
can it be sacred if it doesn't have beauty?
Probably, I have to say, within my limited sphere, because the very small sphere that I move in, which is obviously iconography, sacred art, and I'm kind of insulated really in that regard, because I don't move in modern art circles, not by choice, but just by effect of the area I work in. There's been some recent works of art associated with the Vatican or St. Peter's Square. I think it was the Christmas Nativity recently.
The Playmobil one, that awful one with the spaceman.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, you just said it, the awful one. What did it do? Did it move anyone? Everything was an inversion. In terms of sculpture of the physical space, I think the faces were almost indented inwards or things like that. It was just had an absurdity. Can sacred art not be beautiful? I'd have to say probably not. No.
Because even when it focuses on not beautiful things, like the torture and crucifixion of Christ is not a beautiful thing, but there's beauty in the redemption, and it still draws out that beauty, right?
Yeah. I mean, let's take the Mel Gibson's Passion of the Christ movie. Pretty violent, but I'd have to say, using beauty as a metaphysical concept, extraordinarily beautiful movie. I mean, again, there's a kind of absurdity with that because it was an R18 movie that did massively well, and the film executives sat back and scratched their heads, saying, "These are the people who complain about violence in our movies, and they're loving this one."
I didn't get it.
Yeah.
I remember being in a video store in Auckland. We were living in Auckland at the time when it had just been released on DVD. And I remember there was a lady who ran the store, and another lady came in and picked it up. And she said, "Oh, is this any good? I've heard about it." And the video store lady said, "Oh, I was so disappointed. I was expecting some new thing, and it was just, same old, same old." And I just remember thinking, wow, that's not how I'd describe that movie if I was going to describe it as anything.
Oh my goodness! I mean, I would love one day somehow to take that movie scene by scene and draw out the iconography that was in it. If we've got a moment here, I'll just
do it. I mean, my mind straight away was thinking of that scene where the demonic parody of the mother of Christ in Christ, that demonic looking baby. Everyone remembers that scene.
Yes,
it's beautiful.
Yes.
It's actually profound, right?
Yes. So that's promoting the idea of the devil always has some kind of counterfeit. But let's connect to iconography with the Passion of the Christ. Often in iconography, a holy person that's being depicted, usually Christ, you look at the eyes, and one eye is looking sort of pretty much straight ahead, and the other eye is looking just a little bit off. It's almost, you just dismiss it as a amateur accident, but it's actually got a meaning to it, because one eye is seeing and loving. Sorry, that's the other way around. One eye is seeing and it's judging. The other eye is sort of, I'm not seeing this, I'll let it go, I'm forgiving. Wow. So in the one person of Jesus Christ, you have love, forgiveness, justice. The two merge, you get mercy. Yeah. So it's an icon of mercy. Now go back to the Passion of the Christ. Early on, I think in the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus is punched in the face, and he's got a black eye. Only one eye, but we're shown that swollen eye multiple times. So I believe Mel Gibson took that concept from iconography and put it into the lexicon of cinematography.
Yeah,
he's showing mercy personified in Jesus Christ. One eye can see and judge, the other cannot see, is not preferring not to see, dismissing and forgiving. That's my interpretation.
Wow, that's beautiful. Yeah, we'll come back to that in a minute. Actually, I want to talk about some other symbols in sacred art that we can miss, and we can completely fail to understand what we're actually seeing. But do you think art can be possibly, we live in the age of this sort of bizarre dichotomy that's crafted between faith and rationalism or reason, as if the two are opposed to each other, as opposed to being, faith and reason is what authentic faith really should be, religious belief should be built on. But do you think possibly art then, and I'm really probably thinking sacred art here in particular, but do you think that this can be a bridge then, perhaps, to sort of counter the hard rationalism, and also to challenge perhaps the blind fideism, which would perhaps go the other way? Do you think there's something in that idea?
Yeah, I think so. I'm just trying to recall an example of that. So there's the metaphysical aspect of beauty, truth, and goodness, and that's obviously a very left brain kind of concept. And then you've got the right brain aspect of things that is symbolic and non-verbal, etc. So, as Catholics, obviously, faith and reason go hand in hand, work together. And perhaps the question really is, how did we get to this point where there is this division between the two, between what can be known and what can be felt? Perhaps I don't quite know the answer to that one, but
well, as you're speaking, actually, I just think to myself, well, hold on a minute. Even in like sacred art itself is probably in some ways a sort of a beautiful marriage of the two when you think about it. Like you mentioned earlier, the importance of craft and technique. So there's your sort of technological aspect, but it's not just technology unhinged from anything else like the materialist might have. It's this technology put at the service of the sacred order, and then it brings out what is good, true, and beautiful, and it's loaded with philosophy. It's one thing that struck me as I was thinking about today was in our conversation was sacred art it's always going to have more layers, in particular at least one more layer than any other type of art, because it's that theological layer that no other art has that really transforms what you see, right?
Yes, divine truth. That's the highest of all truths. So all truth ultimately emanates from divine truth. So cascading downwards, below that is objective truth. What is true amongst us within the world, and then we have to take on that truth and absorb it. And how is this true to me? I'm a bit wary about saying that because that's the dangerous place to be in. We've got to a point. We use this word postmodernism. Effectively, what it means is truth is only a thing that I can know within myself.
Yeah.
All other orders of truth are severed at the root, and inaccessible now. Again, back to the wading through the porridge. So if we can, that sea of postmodernism that we're trying to extract ourselves from and find that aspect of, again, beauty, truth, and goodness that will illuminate us. Yeah.
I got a couple of questions I want to finish up with. One is, do you think, because I'd love to hear your take on this. This is my sense is that the Christian church in the West has lost sight of the fact that sacred art is actually an extremely powerful, and I would say it's like a perpetual motion engine. It's a perpetual form of powerful evangelization. So if you have a piece of sacred and beautiful art, it's always evangelizing whenever someone encounters it. You don't have to reinvent the program. You don't have to have a band. You don't need flashing lights. As soon as you encounter that thing, it engages with you and it pulls you upwards. But my sense is that the West, we've just lost sight of that. I look around churches with felt banners hanging off around the back of out the front, or places that are beer warehouses with lots of strobe lights and really expensive sound gear. But in both of those scenarios, what's missing is that depiction of the sacred in a beautiful form that constantly evangelizes everyone who encounters it.
Yeah, it evangelizes in silence too, and that's really important. I had the opportunity to visit my children's primary school a few years ago, and I gave the class a little talk on icons. What I'd done is I'd walked around the school one day, and I thought to myself, Catholic school, where's the sacred art? It was there just wasn't much at all, if any. And I thought, well, I can fix this. So I went to the headmaster at the time and said, look, I want to fix this situation. I'm going to donate an icon to the school. I'm going to paint it. This is the school was St. Mary's, so it was an icon of Mary with infant Jesus. And I said to them, look, here's the prototype. I'd love you to put a reproduction of it in every classroom so that every child is being exposed to good Catholic art, sacred art in their classrooms, and is benefiting from it. But that wasn't quite enough in a sense, because nobody knows how to interface with an icon if they've never come across one before. So I had the opportunity to go into the classroom and talk to at least one class about icons and iconography. And I had images of St. Michael, the Archangel, an image of infant Jesus, which we refer to as the Logos, or actually the youthful Christ. And I just talked about it, and they got a sense of my passion. And at the end, wrapping up, I said to them, okay, who wants to be an iconographer? All the hands went up, all of them. I thought, yeah, I've reached them. And I suspect, no disrespect to any RE teacher in this country, but I suspect that those children, probably for the first time, had someone speak with a passion about their Catholic faith, and particularly in an area that their faith can be lived out. In my case, through the artwork. Yeah.
It's kind of funny, isn't it? Because there's almost, I think, even across the other denominations, there's almost like an iconoclasm that has corrupted the church, where we've mistakenly thought that if you have a beautiful sacred statue or sacred art, it's okay in a museum, but you bring it into a church and all of a sudden, this is a golden calf moment. We're about to start worshipping this thing. And also this whole thing of, we got to not waste our money on the building, and we got to spend it on helping the poor. And you're like, but then a lot of those same churches will then spend tens of thousands of dollars, regardless of denomination, on sound equipment and all sorts of other stuff. And it's like, well, that's a lot of money going in a particular direction. But yes. What's missing in all of this is this. It's funny because we don't treat music that way in a lot of ways. Like, people still look at Bach and Vivaldi and they go, wow, it's so beautiful. And they're able to make that distinction where they don't see that as an idol. But for some reason, actual physical objects like statues and icons, we tend to freak out about, and we've pushed them aside. And it's a real tragedy.
Yeah. And it is that misunderstanding from, I believe it's Deuteronomy and the Ten Commandments: thou shalt not have any false idols before thee. And here's us Catholics with our statues and often icons. But you can go a bit further, and I think Deuteronomy and God is instructing the Israelites to construct the Ark of the Covenant, and giving explicit instructions of putting two winged creatures on the top, gilded in gold, and this was to be the mercy seat. This was the seat that God would sit upon to be amongst his chosen people. And then a little bit further on, there's the scourge of the serpents who are attacking the Israelites in the desert. And God again instructs Moses to create the staff with a bronze serpent on it, and anyone who looks at it is healed. They look upon it. So he's kind of carrying around a sacrament there. There's this in between. So there is that misunderstanding and misinterpretation of please correct me if I'm wrong, the third commandment. And it needs to be helped and rectified.
Do you know a helpful analogy I found was, because I used to have a sort of a hostility in this area myself, and one I remember hearing someone, a theologian, talking about, well, think about your family photo album back when we had photographs. They're an image of something beautiful that you hold very dear in your heart. They are a reminder of something. There's a certain memorial aspect to them, but you don't worship the photo. The photo is there to actually draw you into a more full expression and experience of that relationship with the person. And so we would say sacred art, I think, is a call to that fullness of relationship with Christ, right?
Precisely, yes. So, again, we're flawed human beings. We need help, and that's what sacred art. That's the role. One of the roles it performs. It helps us. It helps us to focus. It reminds us of why we're here. It's easy to sort of drift off in the sermon when the priest is giving a sermon, and I'm thinking about something else. But the art, whether it's singing and the beauty of a song, or the visual of the sacred art, it pulls us back into things. Many things. The richness of our Catholic faith is that we have many things that help us along. We've got many consolations. Gestures are important too. Icons are intrinsically part of the liturgy, but also our gestures in response to the liturgy also help to focus us and bring us back in. Just doing the sign of the cross. As soon as I do that, I'm switched on for prayer straight away.
It's quite powerful. You've touched on the world of symbolism, so let's end there. And I wanted to get to this point was, tell us some of the inside baseball then, David. What are some of the things people probably look at in a sacred art piece or an icon, and they, whether it's in the eyes or the fingers or the hands, whatever it is, and they or even the animals in certain images, right? What is it that we miss so often, and we just so simplistic, we go sort of, it looks a bit strange the way things are drawn there, and we're missing all of this deep symbolism that's loaded into these things. Give us some of those pointers.
Yeah. I think the most profound, the most revered icon is the one that started all this for me, the icon of the Holy Trinity. So Andrei Rublev, an Orthodox monk, painted it in the 14th century. I've given a talk on sacred art in the past, and I projected the image of the icon of the Holy Trinity. So it's the three visitors to Abraham and Sarah, the three angelic visitors, who traditionally the church fathers have always said it's the Holy Trinity, because we have a verse that says the Lord came to visit Abraham. The Lord came to visit Abraham, and then the next line, the three visitors in white. The Lord, the three visitors in white. It's Trinitarian.
Yeah.
So I put it up on the wall, and I say to people, okay, what's the first thing that strikes you? What's the first thing you can learn from this image? And people are sort of umming, and I say, three distinct persons. It's so obvious. It's not one person with three heads. It's not one person with three ideas. It's three distinct persons. That's the first thing. We start looking a bit closer after that. The angels are genderless. They're neither male nor female. The three angels have identical faces. And then it starts diverging. So on the left you have the angel representing the Father. He's got an indiscernible colour in his robes. What is that colour? I can't quite make it out, because the Father is this intangible person within the Godhead. You go to the middle angel, and he's seated higher, slightly higher than the others. Well, that's Christ, the King. He's wearing the traditional blue and red robes that Christ is depicted in iconography, the Pantocrator in Greek. And then on the third, the Holy Spirit is, I believe, is wearing green. I know that all three angels have one shared colour. The form of the angels, they form the shape of a chalice. And the central figure of Christ is in the centre of the chalice. In fact, a whole books have been written on this one icon, that you can plumb so many depths in this one icon, that entire books are written on it.
Katie and I, that was our wedding icon, actually. I got a secret gift arranged, a rather large version of it on wooden backing that at the very end of our marriage ceremony.
Yes, excellent.
And it hangs in our lounge now.
Awesome. Yeah, it's my favourite icon, and it's the origin of everything for me. Yeah. There's a very interesting icon of the Nativity. So Christ has been born. He's in the manger, wrapped in swaddling clothes. Mary is reclining beside him, and off to the side is Saint Joseph, the foster father of Jesus, and there's this little wizened crony chatting to him, and that little wizened crony is actually the devil, telling Joseph, look at all this that you've got yourself into, this unwed pregnant mother. Well, she's given birth now, but he's attacking Saint Joseph. But the way he's depicted is this little vagabond, if you like. So yeah, even the devil makes an appearance in the margins, as Jonathan Pajot says. So
he's there. He's always fighting about, old Sparky, trying to devour people.
Exactly. Yeah.
Tell me, can you explain this? Because you see this a lot in sacred art and iconography with Christ in his fingers. Can you give us an explanation of that?
Yes, absolutely. So it's often depicted as, put it into the camera. Yeah. So we've got a circle.
Yep.
Forming here, and the circle is the most perfect form of geometry. Yep. So it's perfect for depicting God, or being used as a symbol to infer God. The two fingers they're always together, not splayed.
Yep.
Always together. It's refers to the incarnation of Christ. So Christ is fully human, fully divine. And those natures are not in conflict with each other. They are the fullness of the incarnated Christ. And you'll see the two fingers maybe bent or slightly curved. And in iconography, you'll see the Greek letters, the names for each of the characters. And with Christ, it's ICXC, so Ekthos Christos in Greek.
Yeah.
And the fingers will actually delineate the IC and the XC. Wow. You'll be able to see the crossover of the X. You'll find a C in there and an I in there.
And then you've got three fingers down here, right?
Exactly. And so obviously the thumb represents the Father. The Son are the two extended ones. The Holy Spirit forms the continuity and completes the unity. Yeah.
And that's just one hand, and like that's the depth of what we're talking about here. These profoundly important theological truths that are just put out in a way that once you know them, anybody can really start delving deeply into their Christian faith. Right, every time they encounter one of these images.
Precisely, yeah. Like we said before, it's the evangelizing in silence. Just a simple little thing as a hand and a certain gesture speaks volumes when you know how to interpret it and receive that grace from it.
Dave, thank you so much for being with us here today. I guess the $1 million question some people are asking is, look, how do we follow Dave? Where can we see his work? How do people do that? Are you on socials, or can they go somewhere even and just sit in front of one of your icons and observe the thing?
Yes, so I'm on Instagram under my name, David Gianotti. Also, I must put a shout out for my colleague, Michael Pavan from the Studio of John the Baptist. So look up Studio of John the Baptist on Instagram. Where else? I've got my own website. Just search my name. We'll take you to my website. In terms of seeing some of my artwork, St. Mary's Parish Northcote is there's one icon there on the wall that's public.
That's in Auckland, folks, for those who don't know.
In Auckland, New Zealand, yes, on the North Shore, St. Mary's Northcote. The other one is the big one, is the new parish, St. Luke's at Flatbush, where the two windows, the main window over the sanctuary, there's an image of the crucifixion there, and directly opposite is the image of Our Lady ascending into heaven and also being crowned Queen of Heaven at the same time. So that is the big one at the moment. That's the recent one that has just gone public. And I was just at a liturgy committee meeting last night, and one of the persons there said, look, they just told us, I've just seen your work at Flatbush, and they said to us that in the morning when the light passes through the window of Our Lady, she gets projected down onto the sanctuary, and she's standing at the foot of the cross.
Wow. Wow.
Nobody planned that. I didn't plan it. The architects didn't plan it. Just natural phenomena. Yeah.
That's beautiful.
I was blown away.
And I guess you're going to say, Dave, to complete that metaphor, that's where you were when you were creating that art, and that's where we should all be when we encounter sacred art, at the foot of the cross, right? Gazing at Christ.
Precisely. Well said, my friend. Yes.
Beautiful. David, thank you so much for being here to have this conversation. I've really, really enjoyed it. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.